All right, welcome everybody. We have 20 people in the meeting so far, and that leaves about 10 or so additional folks that may be joining us. So I'm going to wait just a minute or so to get started with the official presentation. Anybody has any questions from last week's presentation or last week's lab sessions, you could go ahead and ask those now. And if you have questions during the meeting, if you put those in the chat, I keep that open. So hopefully I'll pick up on those and can answer those as we go along. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So this is the second session of what we're calling the agency UAT sessions, and today from a agenda perspective, we're going to talk about funding. Let me get my whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do. There we go. Let me get my agenda up here on the screen. Today we're going to talk about funding. We're going to talk about purchase orders. We're going to talk about applications for payment and vouchers. And a vast majority of it will be talking about what's actually a brand new business process to take care of the funding operations specifically within the agency environment. And then I'll also spend a good bit of time looking at the modifications we made to application for payment and talking about what those mean. I'm actually going to turn off my camera while I present, so I won't be a distraction, right? Hopefully everybody can see the PowerPoint presentation. If you can't see the PowerPoint presentation, let me know. The agenda today will be very similar to what we did last week in that we're going to start with a PowerPoint. That's probably going to be about 45 minutes today. And then we'll break out into smaller sessions, and Shauna, Rita, and myself will lead those breakout sessions. They'll be facilitated, and we'll actually go into the OAKS test environment and walk you through the owner role in both application for payment and the new funding business process. And then we'll get back together in this meeting space and do a short debriefing with everybody. Wanted to start, I know you saw this slide, in fact you saw the next 3 slides last week. Some folks were not here last week and are here again this week. And I just like to remind everybody, when I did this with architects and contractors, we saw this slide 5 times. But I want to remind everybody the goals that led us to kind of remake OCI and create OCI version 2. And it all really started with the projects team developing a set of work processes that would be the same for agency and for K-12 for higher ed. And we wanted to implement those unified work processes in OCI so that the work processes would be consistent everywhere. Once we decided we were going to do that, we also started looking at, can we do things that will improve end user efficiency? And from our perspective, the end user are all of the users of OCI, whether that be the architects and contractors that work with us in the system, the owners, you guys in the agencies, and also our own staff, our project coordinators and project managers. So we're really looking to make the system more efficient. And then we we added CMR and design build support to the existing OCI business processes when those methodologies were permitted by the state. But this gave us a chance to really enhance the support of those. And you saw, I think last week, a lot of the additional support that we put in for CMR and design build, just in terms of being able to track milestones for CMR and design build projects throughout, adding a lot of procurement support for those business processes that was not there before. And last but maybe not least, we wanted to utilize some of the new features of Unifier that were hard to retrofit into an existing BP, but designing a BP from scratch we could use. And so that was really our overall set of goals. I would also remind you that OCI version 2 will be on all of your new OFCC administered projects. That will not be on your locally administered projects. So when you do locally administered projects, the business processes and the version of OCI that you're using will not change at this point in time. And we are planning some discussions starting this fall with the agencies regarding how to implement some of these concepts of version 2 in the locally administered projects as well. That's kind of where we're at right now. One of the things I wanted to point out is that in version 2, we added instructions to every form. So whatever task that you're doing, when the form comes up, once you've accepted the task, you'll get instructions to tell you why you received the record, what you need to do, and then what workflow actions will be available to you when you leave the step or push it on to the next step. And during UAT, read those instructions and kind of expect them for clarity and correctness and completeness. And if you think something's not clear or you do something different, that's a discussion that we'd like to have with you. We put hundreds and hundreds of instructions on forms, and I'm sure that they're not all 100% correct at this point. And so if we can clean some of those up as we go through the testing process, that's great. And once we get into production and you start seeing these forms in real life and you think, well, that instruction's wrong, that would be your signal to let us know that instruction's wrong. You can just put a help desk ticket in and say, hey, looking at this instruction at this step, and this is what I think it should say. And then the third slide from last week that I think is important enough to bring up again is that the document manager is completely different. And so we went with one common document manager, and it's very similar, not exactly alike, but very similar to the structure we've used for the last 4 years for K-12 projects. And one of the reasons we did that is that structure allows us to provide for auto-publishing from every business process. So whereas today in a lot of your business processes, you upload a file to the document manager, and then you go to the business process and you attach to the file in the document manager. What auto-publishing allows you to do is upload directly to the business process from your desktop, and then Unifier takes care of publishing that particular document in the document manager in an appropriate place. And it accomplishes two things. First of all, it's just easier to do. It's more efficient for whoever's uploading that document, but it also helps enforce a hierarchy of documents. So you always know where to find a document in the document manager because it's where Unifier puts it, and Unifier always puts it in the same place. Whereas if the document is uploaded by individuals, they get uploaded to a variety of places. So other changes we made to the document manager, we other than the top level of directories, there's no subdirectories. So that's going to minimize empty directories. And then we enhanced permission limits, and in particular, we do not allow contractors and architects, some of the non-state of Ohio folks, access to some areas of the document manager. That they basically have to get to those documents through the business processes to get to them. And that was just out of privacy kind of concerns. We were just trying to create a more secure environment than what we've had in the existing version of OCI. Okay, enough review. let's talk about funding information in OCI. And you might think funding information in OCI isn't OCSFIN the financial system of record, and that's correct. OCSFIN is the financial system of record, and all the payments and all the purchase orders are generated there. But OCI, as the construction management system, needs to provide appropriate facilities for cost management. And what we have in OCI today is a cost sheet and a fund sheet, which are there basically to facilitate a roll-up of costs and roll-up of use of funds within the project. And so to set those up properly, we have to have some insight into what funds the agency is using to fund the individual project. And what we will be looking for, what we're generally asking for is, for this project, what are the ALI, the department org code, and the program code that you use. And given those codes, then within OCI, we can set up appropriate fund code attributes to manage all of that. And it facilitates putting the funds on purchase orders and vouchers. I don't know if everybody has seen the fund sheet before. It looks kind of like this, but I think rather than showing you a picture of it, what I'm going to try to do here is actually go show it to you. So hopefully everybody can see my my OCI application here. And within any project within OCI, there's a cost manager here on the left menu. And if you click on the cost manager, it's going to open up and show you that it has a cost sheet, a fund sheet, and some schedule of values. So when we talk about funding, we're actually talking about the fund sheet, which is right here. And this particular project has only one fund. Most agency projects, in fact, have only one fund. So this particular fund sheet is just showing us how much funding was released to the project, how much of it has been used on purchase orders. So, and if you actually click on the number here, the 970,000, it will show you what those are. So you can see the list of purchase orders that went into that. And then it will show you, and there haven't been any expenditures, there haven't been any vouchers on this project yet, but this is going to be a list of the vouchers that were associated with this particular project and this particular fund. And obviously, if you have multiple funds, then a purchase order or voucher can be written against one or more of those. And ultimately, it's just a summary of your financial information. And the cost sheet is something very similar, although this is the trouble with live demos, is they come slowly. So the cost sheet, when you get into it, is going to break things out by WBS code, and you can summarize those down to this is the architect, this is the CMR, this is the construction, et cetera, and then see various columns. And this particular one does not, I think, have all the columns in it yet, but this is going to show you your commitments, and then the invoices against those commitments. So it takes things from a cost side in terms of what was my budget. The things that are missing here, by the way, are the budget. What was my budget? What commitments have I made against the budget? And then what invoices have I received against those commitments? So I can give you an idea of where you are from a cost perspective. Put you back out of the way. I'll ask for questions. I see there is one question in the chat, and it says, how will this impact a project that may be using state funds and local funds? Basically, in OCI, you would set up the state fund and the local fund as separate funds within OCI. And then as you create your purchase orders and your vouchers in your financial system of record, you obviously consume from those funds. In OCI, we would have a record that would reflect that same consumption. So OCI should show the construction management staff the remaining amount of state funds and local funds on the project at any particular time. And we do this with our school facilities projects a lot, where we have a project fund, but we also have something we call locally funded initiatives, some local funds that are set aside to handle certain needs of the project. And so OCI tracks both of those funds for them throughout the life of the project and can give them current balances. Are there other projects while I try to get my cursor in the right window? All right. We talked about the funding sheet. Let's talk about the funding BP now. And the funding BP is, in fact, a new business process. We were working to make the business processes and the workflows within OCI consistent for school facilities and agency higher ed projects. And we got into the contracting BPs and actually had them built out with two different workflows, one that kind of supported the agency funding process and one that kind of supported the K-12 process. And we didn't like that. When we started testing that, it didn't seem to support the whole idea of having things the same. And so the idea was suggested that we pull funding out into its own work process. And that would leave the development of the contract document itself, whatever contract it was, which would be created in the DocuSign. And it would leave the creation of the contract SOV. So we basically went through and modified everything to have a document BP, a funding BP, and an SOV business process. And of course, the funding business process is one we're looking at here. There is one funding business process for all kinds of things that need funded. So you use the same funding business process to fund an agreement, a contract, a GMP amendment, or if you need additional contingency to fund change orders. In all cases, it's kind of the same thing. So this is intended to separate funding activities from the associated contract activities. It's an agency-only business process, so it caters to the agency process. And this automates the rec letter process, but it doesn't replace the rec letter process. So one of the things that comes out of this funding business process now is the custom print of the rec letter. And that rec letter will still get sent as it does today by our project coordinators to each of the agencies and to whomever receives that in the agencies. But the funding business process is also going to get forwarded to the agency at the same time. So I'm going to flip forward on the slides here and look at the workflow just very quickly. And then we're going to kind of talk about each of these activities separately. So I'm not going to go into them in any detail just yet, but only if I can find my cursor. So the key activities here, once the funding record is created, it goes to our finance folks who issue contract and lease and permit numbers, and those numbers get added into the record. So we're handling that contract and lease and permit process a little differently than we do today internally. Then we send it, actually, this is the first time we've ever done this. It's kind of cool. We send it to a step that's actually handled by a Java computer program that calculates the admin fee. And so in the past, our coordinators calculated the admin fee by hand. We kind of took that off their to-do list and said, hey, we have the application that calculates the fees when we're billing. Let's use it to calculate the fees for the rec letter. And so that gets added to this funding business process. And then finally, fiscal reviews it and sends it over to the project coordinator to create the rec letter. And so the contract number, the fees, and so on and so forth, all included on the rec letter as they've been created through this process. The last step is PO creation. and that would be where the owner's financial staff actually execute the PO creation step. And what we're hoping is that you will record those purchase orders here in OCI, in addition to obtaining them through the financial system through OAKS. Just a little bit more detail. I don't want to spend a huge amount of time, but we're going to go through each of the steps here briefly. And in this whole process, in order to get the fees correct, we have the coordinators submit all their contracts and agreements that they're going to need at a given time, and then create a funding BP record. The funding BP itself supports one contract record at a time. So if you're doing a CMR design build project, for example, and you have an AE, criteria AE or an AE, and you also have a CMR or a DB contract, we would create two funding records, one for each of those, and we're going to put a separate contract number, release and permit number, whichever is appropriate on each of those as it processes through the system. And then there's some items in here that they would pick. Rec letter type is one of them, and rec letter type basically drives what kind of fee calculation we do, whether we're designing for design phase or for construction phase fees. So this is just how it gets created and started. Once the coordinators finish that, as I said before, it's going to go over to our fiscal folks, and they're going to take care of adding the contract number to it. And they're going to put the contract number right on the form, so you can see there's a contracts info one block, which in the end collects all the information that you need to go in and do the purchase order, and or at least that's the intention. And so the contract number, release and permit number gets put directly into that form, along with if the contract's going to have an expiration date on it, which today I don't believe we expired them. Be blank. But we have the facilities here to expire contracts and also a maximum contract amount. Or if it's a release and permit, again, the release and permit number and that amount as well. And those numbers get recorded in the funding BP, and that would be where you would pick them up within the agency. So you're used to seeing those on the rec letter. They'll still be on the rec letter because we're going to produce a rec letter again out of this business process. The next step in the process, we have OCI go out and calculate the admin fee, and it's going to write them into this business process as well. There's a block there for admin fees. That'll basically show you, this is the Reader's Digest condensed version, because it's going to show you the current admin fees and any amount that's been previously requested, regardless of whether they've been billed or paid or not. But in a previous rec letter we asked for them, then they would be reduced by that amount, and that gives you the fee request for this particular rec letter. And once we have all that verified, we'll go back to the project coordinator, and they'll use a custom print to create the rec letter itself. If there are multiple contracts in one rec letter, the coordinator is going to have to edit the rec letter that comes out of OCI and basically give you a list of those contracts. So essentially what they're doing is they're combining the multiple funding BP records into one rec letter and attaching that rec letter to one or both of them. Note on the bottom, fees should be correct. We've done everything to make sure that the application processes them correctly. It's a new application. If I were the owner, I'd check my fees just like you checked them today, and let us know when they're not right, and we'll figure out why and get that fixed. I'd like to think they're all going to be correct because I did a lot of the testing on that particular application. So the record will then actually go to the owner financial role in your agency. So some of you in the meeting today are here because you're in that owner financial role. So you're going to get a funding BP, and it's going to be for PO. You may or may not be involved in the process of taking this particular set of contracts through controlling board and getting all that approval. And that's one of the reasons why the rec letter is still being created and still being sent to the parties that we send them to today. Is we don't want to change the process at the agency. We want the process at the agency to continue to work as it does. And then once that PO is ready to be issued in the financial system of record, you can come into the funding BP and enter that information here as well. And a couple of slides here on processing one of these. And basically, the first thing you'll do is just accept the task like you would accept any task that comes to you in OCI. You'll see that it was sent for PO creation. It's a funding record task. And once you accept it, then basically it becomes yours to act on. And you'll get a what we call an action screen. If you create the purchase order in the funding BP itself, and when you look in the funding BP, you're going to see a general tab, which is that first tab you come to. You're also going to see a purchase order tab. And if you click on this purchase order tab, and I may have another slide on this in a minute, it will actually open a purchase order record and let you enter the data into that record. A lot of the information that you need, I think I talked about this earlier, for creating a purchase order should be right here in the contract info block. And so this is where you'll find the actual release and permit that we put together. And I don't know if that looks like anything like a real release and permit or not. It's just test data. But you'll find the vendor's name, the amount of the contract agreement, their tax ID. And as you can see in our test data, we didn't have one, but it will be there. We'll have their legal name from the vendor record, and then, oops, that was inadvertent. And then the contract number, release and permit number information. And yeah, I was getting ahead of myself a minute earlier. POs can be entered from the PO logs as usual. So you can go to PO and enter a new PO that way. But in version 2, there is an easier way using what we call a query tab. And I'm going to go ahead and hop to the next slide here. So in this case, we've clicked on purchase order version 2 within the funding business process. And it actually opens a window here to create, it's going to open initially a log of any purchase orders that have already been created that are associated with this particular funding item. And then if you click the create button here, it will actually open a window to create a new purchase order. And one of the nice things it does when you do that, is it's going to bring in information from this particular, for this particular business process. So it'll populate any fields that the funding business process has the information for. And I think we are probably funding a little bit more than what you're seeing funded right here or filled in on this particular slide. The slide's kind of old. So you use the query tab to initiate the purchase order creation. It's faster than doing it the old way, and then complete the PO normally. And then once you finish, you'll just submit the purchase order, and that purchase order will be stored in the purchase order log, and it will also be shown here in the funding business process. So a summary of the funding BP, it's a new BP which automates the agency funding process, including your contract release and permit number assignment, your admin fee calculation, your rec letter creation, and your purchase order issue. And creating a funding record after you have created, a funding record will be created. The slide was written for coordinators. A funding record will be created after all the agreement and contract records have been created, and you'll get a rec letter. And as I've mentioned before, you will continue to receive a rec letter the old-fashioned way, in addition to receiving this record. So let me stop here and check for anything in the chat, but also ask if you guys have any questions. Anybody has a question, just ask away. All right, so I have one question in the chat. No interaction between OCI and Fin, correct? We still have to manually upload vouchers, etc. At this time, that is correct. However, one of the reasons that we are making some of the changes that you see here in the funding business process is that we are working on interfaces for vouchers and purchase orders with Ben. And by working on it, I mean I actually have programmers coding a purchase order interface as we speak. And so some point, not too much later this year, I think we'll be able to start to bring purchase order data back from OAKS into OCI automatically. And at that point in time, instead of having you guys enter it and tie it up, we'll start doing that electronically through through this interface. It's not quite there yet, and so we still have things set up today to do those manually. All right. And Vincent says, excellent, thank you. It's been too long. in my own personal opinion, it's taken too long to get that done. But we do have it underway. I think it's going to work this time. All right, let's move forward with the presentation. And I wanted to kind of take a detour here for just a second, because we have some business processes that kind of support the owner community. And I'm not sure that everybody's aware of what they are and where they are. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the admin fee billing business process. And this kind of replaces, in the original version of OCI, we had the SAO fee billing business process. So this is kind of the replacement for that. And I just was going to go over and show you this business process for a second. So let me bring up my, there we go, my OCI screen again. And we'll leave the cost sheet here. We'll close him down. And there's an item up here called information. We hide these things really well. It's where Unifier tells us we have to put them. And under information, there's a tab called general. And it has two business processes under it. One is the project information BP, and that's the source of a lot of data that we use in custom prints. And the second one is the admin fee billing BP. I'm going to just open this and give you a very brief tour of what's in this particular business process. Let me just make it big for you here. So on the top tab, the admin fee billing tab, we have a couple of things that are important. We'll have a copy of the latest invoice and the latest rec letter. If those have happened. In this case, a rec letter has been issued on this project. It was issued curiously today, and it had an admin fee on it of $80,000, and that was based on a authorized budget of $12 million. Now, one of the things we're doing a little bit different in version 2, we used to base the admin fee on the budget that was in project information. In version 2, we started requiring that your project managers, which will be our project managers, have a budget allocation for the project completed before we'll issue a rec letter and have that pushed into OCI. So rather than some budget number that somebody had, we're now working with a real budget that's current at the time that we start the procurement process. And so we kind of take a picture of that and put that value here. And that's the number that the design phase admin fee billing fees are going to be based on. We also need a fee schedule, and that's actually the next thing that's in here. So the fee here was based on what we call the OCC Universal Fee from July of 2018. And here's a picture of what that fee schedule looks like. So you can come down and see what fee schedule is being charged. We have some switches in OCI. Any project that's using a contingency, we bill our fee to include the contingency and not on change orders, but we can also do it the other way. So these are some switches that we use just to indicate to the billing application what's going on. So all the information for the billing application is contained right here on the top part of this form, and you have access to it. So you can go in and look at all that and just make sure that your billing is set up correctly and it's being done correctly. There's then 3 more tabs in here, and the one of immediate interest is the rec letter log. So each time we do a rec letter, we'll log it in here, and so you can come in here and look at, well, what rec letters have we received and what fees were associated with the rec letters as we receive them. There's also an invoice log, and there are no invoices on this project yet, but it will do the same thing regarding invoices. And there's a transaction log. So each thing that we have charged you for, so you had the architect's agreement and it was this amount of money and that resulted in a fee of this amount, those will be itemized in here. So if you're ever wanting to dispute a fee or thinking that a fee may be incorrect, this would be your go-to place to go look at what has been charged and just make sure that it looks correct for you. And again, in version 2, we actually completely rewrote the program that does the billing, and we've done extensive testing on it, and I would like to believe that there's absolutely no issues with it, at least until one of you guys contacts me and makes me aware that I'm wrong. So feel free to check us and make sure that we have things correct. I think that is important. Questions about this admin fee billing business process? I think that's a good place to go when you have questions about billing. All right. Let's move on here. Gonna repeat just a little bit of material from last week, but this is at a much more summary level. I'll talk about agreements and contracts, which in the original version of OCI, you had an agreement business process, and you had one contract business process that tried to take care of all kinds of contracts. And for version 2, we separated those out into 3 business processes. So we have agreements, which I think you understand. We have something called best value contracts, and those translate into your CMR and design build contracts, which create very similar contract documents that are supported by the forms that we have in that particular business process. And then we have a trade contracts business process, which support GC and multi-prime contracts. And again, those are very similar layout in terms of the contract form, and the forms that we have in OCI support those. Simplifies the forms and workflows and keeps Rita and I from going crazy trying to maintain those business processes, and it allowed us to provide much more robust support of the CMR and design build methodology. So that's kind of why we did that. But you'll get any and all of those for purchase orders on the owner end. If you're looking for the breakout of this will be true especially for any owner reps. If you're looking for the breakout of the work on the AE agreements, it's no longer on the agreement itself. Similar to what we do with contracts, they'll go on a contract schedule of values business process to put their overall schedule of values in. So all contracts are created equal in that regard, and gives us a much more robust schedule of values to use with pay requests for architects in terms of tracking, in particular tracking edge. Always had some issues tracking edge with architects in the original version of OCI, and those are gone now. Mentioned this before, the use of trade contracts and best value contracts. One of the things that we did, we moved alternates to a separate tab of its own. In the beginning, 12 years ago, we allowed 5 alternates, and one day somebody needed 7 and wanted to expand the form, and so we fairly quickly thereafter expanded it to be 10 and thought we had it nailed, and then somebody needed more than 10, and so we expanded it to 20, and we really thought we had it nailed. And a couple of years ago, one of my school facilities projects needed more than 20. So rather than expand it anymore because it was already is taking up too much screen space. We went with the idea of creating a tab specifically for alternates and adding the alternates to that tab. So you can now have as many alternates as you want. They'll just list down here. And then what we do is we total them up, and we bring the total amount of all the alternates up into the general form and include it in the overall cost of the contract. So and that's how we're handling alternates now. If anybody in the owner community is looking for, hey, where are my alternates? That's where you'll find them. You'll find them on this alternates tab, and you can review them there. So moving on from contracts to contract modifications, again, we kind of followed the same philosophy. We used to have a change order and an amendment. Well, now we have 5 different specialty contract modifications PPs. So we have change directive, we have change order, we have an amendment BP, we also have a GMP amendment BP, and then we have this new business process called contract times that we talked about a good bit in the first session that allow you to monitor and keep up to date on all the milestones associated with each GMP amendment. GMP amendments themselves are in their own business process, and we have both the GMP amendment and the subcontract distributions that result after the GMP amendment in the GMP amendment business process. That's going to take a little bit of getting used to, but it keeps them out of the change order log and keeps them together in one place. Had a fair amount of feedback from PMs and AEs that the change order log, the way we have it in the original version of OCI, isn't usable as a change order log because there were so many things in it that weren't change orders. So we wanted to remedy that. We now have a pretty clean change order log, and we have all of our GMP amendment activity together in one place, which I think supports the process a lot better. In all of these cases, so if you're doing a GMP amendment and it needs a purchase order to go with it, the way we're going to handle that is you would get a funding BP record that would be associated with that GMP amendment. So funding BPs are not just for contracts and agreements, they're for any activity that may require additional funding. So conversely, I mentioned we had pulled GMP amendments out. Well, change order now has workflows for proposal request, request for proposal, and contingency consumption only. PS amendments is a standalone business process. And one of the things that we've done here, and we've actually done this on several business processes, is we've allowed the schedule of values to be attached in a spreadsheet as opposed to loaded at the creation step of the amendment. And then the project coordinator will use that spreadsheet to upload it. And what that does is that prevents us from locking the schedule of values and preventing the contractor or architect in this case from submitting a pay request. So we're trying to reduce schedule values locking. I'm going to eliminate schedule value locking, but we want to reduce schedule value locking so that we're not having issues with architects and contractors being unable to do pay requests. And again, in the event of a PS amendment that needs to be funded, we would go along with the funding BP record. Another time to pause and see if there are questions. I see there's nothing new in the chat, but if anybody out there has questions, now would be a good time to ask. We're gonna plow into application for payment next. All right. So for all you owner rep types that have been doing something else during the funding part, this is where you want to pay attention because we've made some pretty extensive changes to the application for payment, and I'm going to walk through those now and just kind of let you understand what those look like. The application for payment was rethought from kind of the ground up, and it started with, we've always had the vendor enter percent complete on a particular task. And that was very much modeled after a spreadsheet that SAO had 12 years ago when we started doing this. That worked the same way. And that's why it was set up that way in OCI. Frankly, it created some issues. So we started talking about, well, if we had vendors enter dollars earned and we had a CMR or DB vendor that once passed their subcontractor's pay request into OCI to the penny, which we do, entering dollars earned would resolve that issue, wouldn't it? And that's kind of where this whole redesign started. As we worked on it, in addition to having vendors enter dollars earned, we started talking about we could classify work, so labor, material, etc., by WBS code instead of having the vendor classify it. We could have WBS codes that were non-billable, that wouldn't result in billable charges. So we began to work with the application for payment and make some changes to it that would do that. Some of the other features that we added in, that there have been some change order issues that created problems in the application for payment. If you haven't been involved in one of those, you might not be aware of them, but we resolved those by the changes that we made. And I think we made stored materials a lot easier to follow by including some features for that. I'm just going to go through each of these features kind of one by one. So vendors are going to enter dollars. Unifier will then calculate percent complete. So as you're reviewing it as an owner agent or an owner's rep or a PM, you still see all the same information you saw before. You're going to see the dollars of work as well as a percent complete on each individual line item. It does allow entry to any exact penny, which solves some problems, and it simplifies converting stored materials into installed materials. We have any number of pay request examples where folks have had stored materials, and when they installed them, they actually paid us back because they didn't do the installation of the materials quite correctly, and so they ended up losing money on that particular line item. So this will hopefully make that easier to do. Talked about it a minute ago. Work classifications such as labor, materials, and services used to be entered by picking the correct column on the pay request every time you did a pay request and putting the percent complete in the correct column. We got rid of all those columns. We just removed them. We now associate each WBS code with one of those work classifications. So if the particular WBS code is labor, it would be associated with labor. If it's a service, it gets associated with a service. So there isn't confusion between what's a service and what's labor, what should have retainage withheld and what should not have retainage withheld. And that's, again, kind of in support of a lot of the CMR and design build activities where contractors have both labor and services in the same schedule of values. So this very much simplifies pay request preparation, and it eliminates putting work in the wrong category and then having to go back in a future pay request and fix that, which we've within the support desk looked at a lot of pay requests that needed fixed that way. The way we did that is we set up these 5 attributes that you see here on the right hand side of the screen. So cost is labor, cost is material, cost is services. We have a few WBS codes that should not be put on a pay request, and you know, probably the poster child for that is Cmr Contingency. And so I use Cmr Contingency as my example here. Cmr Contingency's attributes are actually all set to no. So if a contractor puts Cmr Contingency on their pay request and gives it a value completed, the amount earned actually still comes out to 0, because what we're doing behind the scenes on the pay request is multiplying labor, material, services, etc. They're getting converted to a 1 or a 0, and we're multiplying the amount by those. So in this case, you're multiplying however much contingency you thought you were going to cash in on by 1, and by 0, and so you end up with a 0 nonetheless. So this will help us. I would still return the pay request to the vendor if I saw that on one and ask them to take that off. But if we miss it, we won't be paying those kinds of items to the vendors. With the application for payment, the way we built it out, overspent line items cannot be submitted by the vendor. So they don't get to the final step of approval, and then we discover that we can't write the schedule of values update because we have an overspent line, and we have to send it back and get it fixed after it's been approved. In this case, overspent line items will get caught by the vendor as soon as they get it, and they're actually with our pay request form now a lot easier to find and debug. So shouldn't have that problem anymore. And probably the last thing, which is kind of subtle, but is a wonderful change. It's no longer possible for change orders to modify the earned to date amount of a pay request. So we had a problem in the original version of OCI to this day that if you had a activity that was partially completed, so partially paid for, if I have a $1,000 activity, it's 50% paid for. I've paid $500. If you change the value of that through a change order from $1,000 to $2,000, Unifier would say, okay, I have a $2,000 activity, it's 50% paid for, I've earned $1,000, and it would add $500 to the amount earned on that particular item. And for that reason, we always would tell contractors never to change an existing line item, at least not upward. Always create a new line item for your change order. We may still continue to do that, but the application for payment BP itself no longer has that issue. Now, when you have a $1,000 line item with $500 paid on it, you change it to $2,000. We're storing the amount that's earned, so it's still $500. And to get that last $1,500, they'll have to put it on a pay request. None of it will come automatically. Give you kind of a high level look here of what you're going to look at when you open application for payment. The general form really is unchanged from what we had before. When you go to the payment details form, you're going to see some things a little bit different, a little bit updated. And so this is kind of what that looks like. This continues off to the right, off the screen. And one of the things that's off the screen is what I'm calling my stored materials balance. So basically, for every line item, it starts with previous material stored, and then the contractor will input materials stored on-site, materials stored off-site, and materials installed, and that gives you a current material stored. So you get to see, hey, on the last pay request, I had 15,000 stored here. I installed 15,000. I now have $0 installed, and I'm going to move $15,000 over to materials complete because I know I just completed those materials. So I think from a contractor perspective of trying to enter and keep track of the materials, this is a lot easier. And then if you're trying to validate that the stored materials that the contractor is claiming are in fact on site, again, you can look at the pay request and very easily see what the current material storage should be for each item on the job. Look just briefly here at the workflow, which is largely unchanged from what it was before. There's separate workflows for professional services and for construction because the professional services provider reviews the construction pay request, so we end up with two workflows that way. But it'll be created by the provider, validated by the coordinator, and then the PM will review it. If it's the last pay request, the project manager would review it. I mean, the program manager would review it, and then it's going to go for the owner's review on the owner approval step and for payment processing by the owner financial step. And again, that is pretty much unchanged from what we have today. And same thing on the contractor workflow with the change that. There's a review step for the architect. If you happen to be a project that has an owner's agent, and those are mostly over in the K-12 world, the owner agent review is included in here as well. And we actually built that with a step in the workflow here. So if you have an owner's agent, that has to get properly set up in project information, or they're actually not going to get pay requests for review. It'll just bypass this step because it will think that they're not there. But this is kind of the same workflow as we have today in OCI for contractor pay requests. Your owner financial, when you actually get the request, before you accept it, you're going to see the full pay request form, so you can see kind of how we get to the amount that's supposed to be paid. But after you accept the task, we hide a lot of the form, and we basically are going to show you this form, which shows the payment requested, and what you're really looking for is the total requested. That's down in the lower right-hand corner. And then we also give you the amount of that would fall in the labor category and what would fall in the materials category. And labor in this case is going to include services in addition to labor. Material would include reimbursables in addition to material. So you'll see that there. Once a payment has been set up in OAKS Fin, what we would like you to do is to go in and enter the voucher information. And again, we mentioned the query tab back when we talked about purchase orders. It's the same arrangement here on the application for payment BP. So you'll see a tab called vouchers. When you go and click on that tab, yes, it's going to look like this. So when you go and click on that tab, you'll have a create button. And once you click the create button, it's going to come in and bring the voucher information in with it. And in this case, you can see that it knows that it's going to voucher Joe's General Pay Request 1. It knows the amount of that. It knows the labor and material distribution of that. And it brings that all into the voucher form for you. You would still need to add the number of the voucher, the amount of the voucher, and the date of the voucher, and then go to the voucher distribution line and pick the fund that it was paid for. And with most agency projects, that's pretty easy because you generally have one fund that you're paying for the whole project for. And so you just put that one fund line in and submit the voucher record. It's going to go and be stored like the PO. It's going to be stored in the voucher BP. It's not going to get stored here, but you'll still be able to reference it here through the query tab. All right, questions. 1:57 according to my clock, so I did not get that in 45 minutes. It took an hour. If there are not any questions, what we're going to do now is we're going to do the same kind of thing we did last week. We're going to let you break out into your lab sessions. So when you got your invitations this morning, and I apologize for leaving those out so late, but you got 2 invitations, and the second one was for 1:30, and it was listed as lab session A, B, or C. So what we'll do here in a minute is leave this particular session, and then you'll join your lab session, and those will be hosted by Shauna and Rita and myself. Once you get into your lab sessions, we'll take probably about 40 minutes. So I'm going to say we're going to try to return here around 2:40, and then we'll do a 20-minute debrief once we get back to here. So let's plan for that. Again, like we did last week, and I'll have this, we'll each have this for you when you get into the lab session, so you don't have to write it down now. But we use our training environment, and you can see the string in red there, which is how you get into that. And we'll have an assigned student account for you once you get in. And in that account, you're going to belong to both the owner rep and owner financial permission groups. So you're going to basically be testing as though you were in an owner rep or an owner financial group account. So anybody have any questions before we break out into groups? All right, hearing no questions, and again, when you finish within your subgroups, you'll come back to this meeting, and to do that, you just go back to the original link that you clicked on. You're going to leave the subgroup and come back to the original link and log back into here, and we'll be interested in your thoughts and opinions from the 2 days of what we've shown you. All right. All right, I think everybody can leave this meeting and go ahead and sign into your subgroup meeting.